Good evening and welcome to the Journey Home. My name is Marcus Grodi, your host for this weekly program. I hope that you and your family and friends had a safe and a fun Independence Day celebration. I was thinking that we do celebrate Independence Day every year to help us remember the great freedoms that we have that were won at a great cost of many lives. But sometimes we take those freedoms for granted because we live in the soup of our freedoms. And some of those freedoms have brought good things, some of them have brought relativity and other problems that into our lives, but yet it's a freedom that we can't take for granted. It's a freedom that we have to utilize correctly. And that freedom reminds me of what the Journey Home program's a bit about, because sometimes we take the freedoms that we have as a result of our Lord Jesus Christ for granted. The freedom from sin, the freedom from being a slave to sin and a slave to our vices, but as a result of the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the church that He gave us to experience the great graces of our faith, we experience this great freedom, but we must not take it for granted. And often, the guests on this program are men and women who walked away from that freedom for a variety of reasons. I know some of you from your letters have either your own lives or your children had freedom as a result of our great faith and the great gift of our new life in Jesus Christ, but we walked away from it. Or maybe no one ever told us about it. Sometimes that's the truth of our guests. And through the great work of the Holy Spirit in their lives, they were awakened to the beauty of Jesus Christ and then the beauty of this great church that He gave us in His apostles. That's what the Journey Home is all about. So thank you for joining us tonight. Our guest tonight is John Nahrgang, and he is going to share his journey in a moment. He comes from a variety of backgrounds, so I'll just say he was a former non-Catholic, but we welcome him to the Journey Home program. Hello, John.
Hello, Marcus.
Thanks for joining us on the program. And you're actually a fairly new Catholic, right?
Yes, I am. I came into the church in the spring of 2006.
And you're wearing the habit of, you're not quite a novitiate, right?
Right. I'm what's called a postulant, the very first stage of formation.
Okay, well, we're going to talk about that in a moment. So, but all of this has happened fairly quickly, right?
Yes, it has. It's been quite a ride.
Well, great. Well, thanks for joining us on the Journey Home. You know the logistics of this program because you were here when one of your friends joined us on the program. So we begin by taking a big step back and inviting you to give us a little snippet of your early spiritual journey.
Yeah. Well, if I were to go way back to the beginning, I was born in April 1980, and I was baptized into the Methodist Church. My dad was born and raised in Anglican, and he married into the Methodist Church, which my mom was a part of. And when I was about 5, we were living in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and we moved to Minnesota. And that's where I grew up. Pretty much was in Minnesota. And I had a very happy childhood. I was very involved, lots of friends, lots of youth sports, very active. And my family and I did go to church. We went to United Methodist Church that was nearby where we lived. And but I would kind of sit there in church with my sister, and we'd kind of be bored. We didn't go down to Sunday school. We'd just kind of be in the main sanctuary and kind of fidget, that sort of thing. And so there came a point where I got kind of tired of it, and I started nagging my parents and said, I'm so bored, and I got sports, and we're so busy. Can we just not go anymore? And to my surprise, they kind of gave in, and so I was kind of at fault for that. It was more me than my sister, and we stopped going to church. I was in 6th grade at the time, I think. But religion wasn't completely absent from my life. I remember when my godmother, for a gift, she gave me a big picture Bible, like a Bible in cartoons, and I read through that, and I was interested in that, and I would bring that up for conversation at the dinner table sometimes, and so this is an interesting story, that kind of thing. But one thing that I also remember was the first time I actually went into a Catholic church. I was fairly young. I attended a friend's sleepover, and I went to church with him the next morning with his family. And we went to a church, and I only knew it as it was called IHM, and I didn't know what that stood for. It turns out later that would stand for Immaculate Heart of Mary. And all I really remembered from it was that we had to kneel a lot. And so that's what I told my mom when I came home.
You didn't kneel very much in the Methodist.
No, I don't even think they had kneelers, yeah. And then another memory I have is that we had taken a road trip to Florida, our family, and on the way back we passed through Indiana, and we stopped at the University of Notre Dame for a visit. And I remember being very impacted by that campus, the beauty of it. I wondered who that person was on the top of the Golden Dome. I was very curious about that. And I remember my dad saying to me, well, John, if you work hard in school, we'll do our best to support you in having an education like this. And that was actually a real motivator for me. It kind of awakened me to the whole wide world that's beyond my junior high and that sort of thing. And I became actually a much more serious student after that. And when it came time to apply for colleges, I remembered that visit, and Notre Dame was number one on my list for applying, even though I had very little exposure to Catholicism and I barely understood Catholicism. But I ended up applying and getting in. And
would you say, first of all, Notre Dame? Most people, I shouldn't say most, I have no idea how many, but a large number, I would guess, in America, when they say Notre Dame, they don't know that they're saying Our Lady.
Our Lady, that's right. Neither did I.
That's what I was wondering. I was just oblivious to.
Yeah, I didn't know. And
the name of the school.
I can't even point to when I actually learned that. It was after that visit, a good deal after that visit. What I associated with Notre Dame wasn't Our Lady, it was the football team, because like a lot of kids, I watched Notre Dame football and had a jacket and all that stuff.
One other question. So you had some Methodist influence, which can be good or bad. I mean, there's a wide range of spiritualities in the Methodist Church, and you didn't hit Sunday school, so you didn't have that regular training. And of course, the only reason I went because my parents gave us an after Sunday school dessert, so I mean, I was always looking forward to that. Yeah. Was there any spiritual aspect of your life? I mean, did you pray? Did God ever enter your thinking during those years?
I didn't really pray. I didn't think about God that much. I didn't know what to think about God. So in high school, I think you could have called me an agnostic. I was curious about knowing the truth about the world and being interested in learning. And that took me to I remember reading a book on philosophy, a commentary on Aristotelian ethics when I was in high school. Being kind of interested by that. I remember going to a website that talked about humanism, and I found that sort of interesting. So there was a curiosity
about truth,
learning about truth, and God was a part of that. I just didn't know; it seemed too big. I didn't really know what to make of it. All right. But then the first real impact that God made actually happened right before I entered Notre Dame. It was the spring of 1998, and my family had a subscription to Time magazine, and I came across a news article in there, a feature article called In the Line of Fire. And it was a feature story on a Catholic lay worker in Chicago. His name was Brother Bill Tomes, and he had been a Notre Dame graduate. He had studied English and philosophy, I think, at Notre Dame. And then he got a master's degree in counseling. And he worked as a counselor for Catholic Charities for about 15 years. And then he came into a juncture in his career where he was considering 2 lucrative job offers. And so he went to a church in Chicago to pray about what to do. And according to him, everything got fuzzy except for an image, a painting of Jesus near the altar. And he said that the image spoke to him. And it said a number of very important things. It said, love, you are forbidden to do anything other than that. Also said, I'll lead, you follow. He said that 3 times to him. He also said, you must forgive everyone, everything. And then he also said, give me all your trust. And then later, he would open his Bible, and he saw this line, don't take any possessions with you. Don't take anything for the road, something to that effect. Yeah. And that kept showing up in different parts of the Bible, and also in other spiritual books he was reading. So he went to a local priest, and he said, what's the meaning of this? The priest said, I think it means that God wants you to get rid of your material possessions. And Bill said to him, I think you're full of it. And but those things kept happening, and so he relented. He sold his possessions, and the guy was 48 at the time. And then a new opportunity came up, an opening to be a youth pastor at a Catholic church in a neighborhood that was just rife with gang violence between 2 of the worst gangs in Chicago, the Gangster Disciples and the Vice Lords. And he started gang outreach, and he started meeting these guys and then becoming friends with these guys. And he built up such a trust with them that they would get into these gunfights. When people were dying, he built up such trust with them. They would call him and say, Brother Bill, if you come here, it could stop. Please stop here. I don't want to kill anyone. He would go in there, and he would walk into the middle of these gunfights. and there'd be bullets going all around him, and he said that he felt an absolute peace. And they'd scream at him to get out of the way, and he'd say, "No, I won't, because I love you." And he did that 58 times, according to the article, and he stopped it every single time, and never once did he get hit with a bullet. And one of the gang members is quoted in the article as saying, "It's like if Brother Bill is willing to take a bullet because he loves you that much, it makes it harder to hate the other side." I think that's why the shooting stops. So here I am, I'm 18 years old, I'm reading this, and I'm just feeling dizzy almost, because it raised so many questions. The nature of religious experience, what Jesus said to him, and then how he went and lived that in his circumstance. I was just very moved by it, and I had never felt that way reading that. And to find it in Time magazine, of all places, I was just stunned. So that started some gears turning before I entered Notre Dame. And I would go back to that feeling later on, but that gave me an initial impression about Christianity and about Catholicism.
Did you expect to then find that when you got to Notre Dame? I
didn't really know what to expect. I had very high hopes, and I kind of wondered, wow, are there going to be other miracle workers here at Notre Dame? This guy went to Notre Dame. But what I found when I was first at Notre Dame, I had some adjustment issues. There were parts of student life that were hard for me to adjust to. In my particular dorm, there was a pretty strong drinking and partying culture, and I wasn't ready for that. I didn't have that in high school, and that caused me to withdraw a bit. I looked at volunteering opportunities and other things, and tried to reach out, but I just couldn't find my niche, and so I withdrew, and I became a bit of a loner, and that unfortunately started what became kind of a depression for me. And when people hear the word depression, I think sometimes they think of different things. For me, the kind of depression that I felt was just a state in which you feel lonely, you feel alone, you don't feel understood, you're kind of confused about what's happening, and then that state persists over weeks, months, and then you start to despair, and that
you feel impotent to get out of it.
Yeah, you're looking for a way out. You're not sure what to do. I went to the counseling department. I just didn't have a good experience there, and so I withdrew more. I'm like, I can't talk to anyone. And then I kind of engaged in some behavior that wasn't good for me. I think a lot of people who are depressed, they look for escapes, and I chose some escapes that weren't that good. My escapes ended up being spending a lot of time alone, playing video games or on the internet. I got into some pornography, which was a big problem, and then junk food too. Anything
that was the worst of all. No.
Yeah, right. Anything I could do to feel better, though, it was almost like a form of self-medication, to deal with the unhappiness I was facing. Yeah. And that state, unfortunately, persisted into my sophomore year. But by that time, I was sort of desperate. Like, I need to get fixed here. I need to feel better again. And so I actually ended up calling Brother Bill. I tracked down his phone number. I called him, and I kind of vented some of my frustrations, and I said, you seem to be someone who, what your purpose is in life, and could you pray for me? Could you give me some guidance? And he thought for a minute, and he said, I'm not sure exactly what I can do for you, John, but I'm going to pray for you, and I would like to meet you. He said, I'm going to be at Notre Dame in November. He would sometimes bring gang members on campus to talk about their experiences. But it turns out I never did meet him because a huge snowstorm came in November that weekend, and he had to cancel his visit. But I was very appreciative. I did end up reaching out and getting into touch with an aunt and uncle from Canada who were devout Christians, and they started to introduce me to Jesus some more, kind of building upon that initial strong impression that Brother Bill had given through the article. And I started attending a Christian fellowship group on campus. It was a mix of Catholics and evangelical Christians, and it kind of had a charismatic feel to it, which was new to me. And I started to make some friends and started to kind of open up about my issues. And I started to feel at that point that, one of the issues with my depression was kind of a spiritual issue. I think there are different dimensions to depression, but I think for me, there were emotional issues, but I think it was a spiritual issue was a big part of it. But still, I still continued in that state. It didn't really bring me out of that. So by my second semester sophomore year, I had always been passionate about Spanish, and I knew I wanted that to be one of my majors. And so what a lot of students do is they study abroad, especially at Notre Dame. And so I escaped abroad, as I like to think of it, to Mexico. And that was really a deep spiritual awakening to Catholicism. That was my best semester in college. My classes went well. I had a good roommate. And then I just felt invigorated in my element, learning Spanish, becoming more proficient at Spanish, taking my classes in Spanish. But then also there were aspects of Catholicism I was exposed to down there that were new to me and very powerful. I ended up attending Mass at a cathedral in downtown Monterrey, Mexico, which is where I was. And the Monsignor there at the cathedral gave some of those powerful homilies, stirring homilies I had ever heard. And what also came across to me, aside from what he preached, was just the universality of the church, because I was the only American at Mass, yet I felt so at home. I felt like I was part of he just made me feel very at home there. And the way he spoke about Christ, it's like it transcended all cultural boundaries and language boundaries. I could understand him fine. And I just really felt just very impacted by that. And so that sort of inspired me to really actively research Catholicism more. So I would spend hours in the computer lab and on the campus of the school there studying more about Catholicism. And actually one of my primary sources of information was EWTN's website. I would go to the Catholic Q&A section of EWTN, and what was his name? Father Bob Levis was one of my kind of informal catechists, and researching all kinds of questions I had, because by that point I had learned enough about the differences between the Protestant churches and the Catholic churches to get into some of the debates and try to understand it. So that was sort of a crash course that I gave myself, and there were huge gaps. It was self-directed, but I learned a lot more about God, I felt, in that time. And then there were a couple other experiences in Mexico that impacted me. I started learning about Our Lady, mostly through Our Lady of Guadalupe, and I had the opportunity to make a pilgrimage to the National Basilica down there, Our Lady of Guadalupe. And I learned about the tilma, the image of her imprinted on that cloak, Juan Diego. And the history of it all just fascinated me. And it fascinated me how that apparition basically converted that country to Catholicism. It was just such a rich history that I was fascinated by. And then another thing that I think Jesus kind of introduced me to down there was interacting with the poor, because as you know, there's a lot of poor in Mexico. And in the places I went, taking the bus and everything, you couldn't help but run into them. And I would read gospel passages, that dealt with the poor, and I would think back again to Brother Bill and what Jesus had said to Brother Bill, and I just felt this urge to try to sort of learn more about Christianity through the poor, and I felt this kind of voice within me, kind of urging me to interact with them and maybe to offer them food or water. And sometimes I chickened out and I couldn't do it on certain days. But moments where I did do it, interacted with them, and some of them would open up and tell me their stories. That was very, very powerful. And it opened up a side of I guess, the call of Christianity that I hadn't been exposed to, but that really broadened my horizons. So Mexico was a fabulous experience where I really kind of tilted more towards Roman Catholicism. And I'm thinking to myself, I was becoming a Christian by that point, and a more serious Christian, and thinking, okay, well, maybe this is the church I should be joining. And I came back from Mexico, and one of the things about studying abroad is, while you're away, students are kind of consolidating their friendships and their groups of friends. And I felt a bit more like a loner when I came back. And so I had a lonely semester, and then I escaped abroad again. This is my second semester junior year, and I went to study abroad in South America, in Chile. And that was actually, in a lot of respects, a very difficult semester. I had a heavy class load. My host family situation wasn't good. And I was taking classes all with native Chilean students, and so I was pretty separated from the American group that I had come down with. And so it was very difficult in a lot of ways. In some ways, my depression deepened. But there was this great light in Chile that happened to me very unexpectedly. So this is what happened. A number of us students participated in kind of an immersion experience with the Marian fathers. Notre Dame had an agreement with the Marian fathers where we were kind of able to shadow some of their missionaries in the rural areas of Chile. Well, before we were in Santiago at the Mother House, the Marian fathers, and I was in their TV room one night, and I came across a documentary, and it was the classic 1986 documentary done on Mother Teresa, the one that's narrated by Richard Attenborough. Fabulous documentary. I highly recommend it. And I was very impacted by it. The charism of her order really comes through beautifully in that documentary. And I had a stronger reaction to it as I had when I read that Time magazine article in 1998. And I felt my spirit kind of reaching out to her. And part of it was sadness, because it's like, you live this life so dedicated to God and you're so fulfilled, and I feel so unfixed and empty, and I want that. I want that transcendence, and I want to feel better. Okay, so we did the immersion experience. I was in rural Chile then, a couple weeks later, and I randomly ran into a Marian old priest, and we got to talking, and I talked about the documentary I had watched. He said, "Oh, that's wonderful." He said, "Oh yeah, I knew Mother Teresa." I said, "You did?" He said, "Yeah." He said, I worked in Calcutta for a time, and I remember this day, there was a time I needed to make a phone call back to my superiors in the United States, and so I went up to this upstairs room to use the phone, and there was no dial tone on the phone. And right then, Mother Teresa walked by in the hallway, and I stuck my head out in the hallway. I said, "Mother Teresa, could you come here for a sec?" She came back. He said, "This phone's not working. Is there another phone somewhere I can use? I need to call my superior." She looked at him, she looked at the phone, she made the sign of the cross, she said a little prayer, and she walked away. And he stood there and he was kind of like, and he looked at the phone, he picked up the phone, dial tone. I love that story because, not only the woman of great miracles, but of little practical miracles,
And great faith in that.
And absolutely. And she did it without hesitating, he said. So.
I don't mean to interrupt your flow, but there's something about that I wanted to ask you about to confirm whether you found this to be true in your own life, because there's a book called the Philokalia, which is a collection of the writings of the great desert fathers of the Eastern Church. And one of those great writers talks about the sin of self-esteem, the sin of self-esteem. In other words, we're so focused on ourselves that we can get so turned inward. And he says the solution to the sin of self-esteem is serving the poor. It almost sounds like in your experience, the way that the Lord was drawing you out of this inwardness was to give of yourself to the poor.
Yeah, I would say that was very true, because, in high school, I thought everything depended on me, and I had to be a success, and I was a perfectionist and all of that, and I relied completely on myself. Well, things went bad at Notre Dame in a way, personally, and then I think one of the things that Jesus taught me in interacting with the poor was your life is about giving yourself to others and serving others, and I was pretty self-centered, so that was a bit of a rough transition, but I learned a lot through that, so I would say that's true. Yeah.
Would you say you had a conversion to Jesus at this point yet, or were you still on the journey in that sense?
I would say I had a conversion to Jesus shortly after I joined that fellowship group at Notre Dame.
Okay.
There was an initial shock, kind of a thunderbolt through the article I read in Time magazine that maybe sort of sowed some seeds in a way. But I would think the conversion happened when I joined that group.
All right.
And I did have a moment there where I sort of gave myself over to him and said, okay.
So by this time, when you're in Chile, you're walking to follow Christ, but you're still catechetically not quite there yet. But
true, and struggling with dark thoughts and depressive thoughts. Okay. And so it was very much kind of light and darkness going side by side in a way. To go back to Mother Teresa, so the semester started in Chile, and one of my classes was a theology class, and it was actually a joint theology class, study of poverty, looking at poverty in the gospel and then looking at it from the perspective of sociology. And one of the requirements of the class was to volunteer with the poor in Santiago. And so there was a list of kind of recommended places to go. So a few days later, I was in the internet cafe in downtown Santiago. And this sudden inspiration came over me. It was, look for her. Look for Mother Teresa. Look for the missionaries of charity. I learned from that documentary that they're all over the world. And so that inspiration came over for me. I really think it was God. I don't think I just kind of came over me myself. But so I did, and sure enough, I found them. They operated a home for terminally ill children in the western slums of Santiago. So I asked my professor if I could volunteer there. She gave me permission. I called them up, and you know what they said to me at first? They said, "So "You're not Mormon?" I said, "No, no, I'm not Mormon." And it turns out that the only Americans they knew in that area were Mormon missionaries who blanketed that area. And it's kind of funny because, if I showed up there today dressed like this, they would have thought I'm a liar, right? But so I went there, and that was life altering, because there was such an environment of love and family, just love for these children. These children, most of them came from poor families who couldn't afford to take care of them. A variety of illnesses and mental handicaps, all kinds of handicaps, physical handicaps. And they treated those kids with such love. And there were 3 experiences, very strong experiences I had there. I only volunteered there about 10 or 12 times over the course of the semester. But I remember these 3 experiences vividly. The first happened when I came into the ward one day, and one of the beds of one of the children was empty. Her name was Maria. She was 2 years old. And I asked one of the nurses, it was a combination of nurses and sisters that ran that place. And I asked one of the nurses, "Where's Maria?" And she said to me, "Maria has gone home to God." And I had rarely been exposed to death of anyone up to that point in my life. And I started tearing up, and I kind of lost it. And the nurse gave me the kindest look, and she said, "Don't cry, John. She's in heaven now with Jesus, and she no longer knows any more pain." And when she said that, it was like something entered the room, and I believe it was the Holy Spirit. And the sense of joy and transcendence came over me. And I'm convinced to this day that that was the Holy Spirit intending to communicate to me some sense of the joy that Maria felt in heaven. And at that point, I no longer doubted the existence of heaven after that. And from that moment on, whenever I thought about that little girl, I never had any sense of sadness or grief, only joy. And I can't explain that other than God was acting in that moment. So that was a major, what I like to call a God moment for me. The second experience I really remember from my time with the sisters was the only Mass I attended there. A diocesan priest came in to hold a Mass, and it took us about 15 or 20 minutes just to get the kids into the Mass, because a lot of crutches and wheelchairs and just moving people in was kind of a logistical challenge. And I remember sitting at the Mass and feeling distracted, and I was watching over some of the children. It was noisy, and the priest didn't seem that into it, so I was kind of bummed out, and I was like, oh. And then, but after the consecration, something changed, and the kids got quiet, and I remember then just feeling, again, this sort of wave of awe and joy, and I remember thinking, thank God for Mother Teresa, that He worked such a miracle through her, and that I am able to share in this moment with these kids at this moment in time, in this place that's unknown by so many people, where there are these heroes of faith living out the Christian vocation, and I get to share in this moment with all these kids. So it instantly turned in one of the most beautiful Masses I'd ever attended. And then the third experience I had that I remember was I would work in the laundry room and hand wash clothes for the kids, and I would feed some of the kids and play with them. And I came out of that room one day, and one of the nurses, Joanna, was talking with one of the sisters. I didn't have a whole lot of interaction with the sisters, but and the sister turned to me and she said, "You have the look of a priest. I bet you'll be a priest one day." And I was shocked, and I said, "Sister, I'm not even Catholic." And she looked at me. She didn't miss a beat. She said, "Con Dios todo se puede," which means with God all things are possible. And so that kind of stayed with me. And I think about that often now that I'm on the path I'm on.
All those three events that the Lord used down there to awaken you and draw you closer to Him. That's a good time for us to take a break. Let's come back in a little bit, and we'll pick up at that point, and as you go deeper in your journey towards the Catholic Church. See you in a bit. Welcome back to the Journey Home. Our guest tonight is John Nahrgang. Thank you, John. I've cut you right in the middle of you're down in Chile with your story, and had some awakening in your spiritual life. I assume they brought you closer to Jesus, right?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Mother Teresa was a great light for me down there, and her example, and being with her sisters, and kind of having that visceral feel for lived Christianity, because those sisters for me were really the embodiment of Christian charity.
When you left Chile, because of all that happened, were you being drawn to the Catholic Church yet at all?
I was, but it was tough because, although Mother Teresa was a great light in Chile, the rest of my time in Chile was pretty much spent in darkness and feeling alone and kind of in anguish. And so actually, I came back from Chile and I came back to Notre Dame. And back at Notre Dame, my depression was kind of back again, and it was a tough time. And some of that I kind of took it out on God, which is kind of ironic because He gave me such a beautiful experience through Mother Teresa. Yet there were other aspects where I was despairing. I was like, why aren't you taking this away? And I held in anger, and so I actually resolved to take a bit of a break from God. So my Mass attendance dropped, and I withdrew a little bit. So this is my senior year now, and I kind of got through that next semester, and then I started what was to be my last semester. This is spring of 2002, and I basically hit rock bottom. What happened was, there was a great event of joy in my family. My sister had been training for a number of years to make the U.S. Olympic team, and she achieved her goal. She competed in the 2002 Salt Lake City Games, and that was a great moment for her and for our family. We were so happy for her. But for me, it was sort of bittersweet because I was there at the Olympics cheering her on, supporting her, but at the same time, I was personally, for me, such a low point, and in a way, kind of jealous for her that, that you've reached these goals, and I feel so. I'm in such turmoil myself, and I wish I could have things together like you seem to. And I came back from those games, and I kind of crashed and burned at Notre Dame. I came to a point where I almost didn't even want to get out of bed. I ended up going to the dean of the business school. My first major was business, second major Spanish, and I withdrew. I withdrew from school. I went home to Minnesota. I withdrew almost basically halfway through the semester, and I went home. I got some counseling. I got a job at a bank, and I kind of pulled things back together, it was a break that I needed, and it was good for me to have that. As it turns out, the psychologist that I saw himself was a Notre Dame graduate, and himself had dealt with issues of loneliness when he was at Notre Dame. So he was a good person to have to work through some issues and kind of pull things back together a bit. I went back spring semester of 2003, finished it off, graduated, and then got a job in corporate finance. And part of me hoped that, with Notre Dame behind me, then, okay, now I'm fine. Things are good. Well, that wasn't the case. I was still getting into those escapes that I had gotten into in college, and so still, living in sin and still attending church very sporadically, and just really despairing. And when things get really bad with depression, I guess I'd like people to know that if they know anyone who's depressed and is wondering just how to put themselves in that person's shoes to try to understand what they're going through. When you spend enough time not believing in yourself, despairing, dealing with feelings of hopelessness, loneliness, frustration that no one's going to understand you, and above all, when you're experiencing that over time and growing in the conviction that things are never going to change or get better, your thoughts can get really dark. And by the summer of 2005, I really bottomed out with my depression. And that was the lowest point of me praying, interacting with God, and I started to have some suicidal thoughts, which was very scary.
I'm wondering, earlier you had mentioned that you really saw that this battle was a spiritual battle.
Yeah.
Did you mean that you were lacking spiritual experience, or did you mean that you really felt that you were under demonic attack?
Well, I think Satan was certainly a part of it, and there to kind of goad me on in a lot of my feelings of worthlessness. Yes, you're worthless. You're never going to amount to anything. That sort of a thing. I think, attacks. Yeah, I think it was definitely, there was a definite spiritual dimension in that, in a way, I had been exposed to these deep eternal truths at these junctures, and when that happens, I think sometimes, if you don't sort of amend your life to live in conformity to that truth, you may suffer as a result. And so a lot of it, I do think, was there were things that happened to me, but there was also me reacting in certain ways. And so when I made the decision to go deeper into my sins or that kind of thing, God respected that, I think, and I think He may have withdrawn a little bit. He respects our decisions.
Well, Jesus has that parable about when you drive a spirit out of a house and clean it up, 7 more can come back in.
Absolutely.
If you're not carefully watching.
Yeah, that's right. And I was in pretty bad shape there, but other times you hit rock bottom, and there's often nowhere to go but up from there. So that's a good thing. And in the midst of hitting rock bottom, I finally came around and I made a very firm resolution. I said, "Okay, Lord, I'm going to commit to living for You, because I've tried this little experiment of taking a break, which ended up being like several years, and it's not working. I need You, and You've shown me these truths, and now I'm gonna respond to them." So that was the turning point in my adult life, my young adult life, and the turning point in my depression, because at that point I immediately resolved to go into RCIA, and so in the fall of 2005, I enrolled in RCIA at the Basilica of St. Mary in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And that was a beautiful experience. We were all in it together, seeking to join the church, and I felt a lot less like a loner in my faith. I felt like I was a part of the community and the body of Christ, and that was very powerful. And then when I was accepted in the church and came in the spring of 2006, 2 very beautiful things opened themselves up to me, 2 sacraments, the sacrament of reconciliation and the Holy Eucharist. That was huge. I had attended Mass for about 6 years without being able to receive the Eucharist. Yeah. And for that to finally happen, that was just an amazing feeling of deeper communion with Jesus. And then the sacrament of reconciliation, invaluable to go and confess my sins to a priest and feel so much lighter, coming out of the confessional afterwards. And to start to get in the habit of doing that made such a difference for me. And from that point, things only got better. Things actually got better pretty rapidly, because I started to spend more time with Jesus alone in front of the Blessed Sacrament. I started to pray the Rosary, and go into Holy Mass. I went to Holy Mass more often. And I really think that in a way was the basis of my turnaround. And I wanted to stress that because, and that's not to make it sound like some kind of a 3-4 step program, because it's much deeper than that. There was something very important in common with all those things, and I think that was deeper communion of life with Jesus, because you achieve that, I think, with all of those things. So, for example, when I would pray the Rosary, I would go into the chapel and I'd be alone with Him, and I'd pray the Rosary, and as you know, but as maybe some non-Catholics maybe don't know, when you pray the Rosary, it's a prayer of intercession addressed to Mary. But she, in turn, it's like you're taking her hand and she's turning you to look at these pivotal events in the life of her Son. And in doing that, you get drawn into that, and then you grow closer to Him, and His strength becomes your strength. And so it really is at root a Christocentric prayer, I believe. And when I was coming out of my depression, I especially latched onto the sorrowful mysteries. I would pray those mysteries, and He'd be suffering in the garden, and I really felt as though He deeply understood my sufferings, and that there was some kind of exchange there where He would kind of take it on, and I would feel lighter and better afterwards. And that progressively happened. Then, as my depression continued to wane, a new set of mysteries took on more significance, and that was the glorious mysteries. And through those events of the glorious mysteries, so the resurrection is victory over death, the ascension, the descent of the Holy Spirit, the theme of victory came across very strongly in praying those. And eventually it hit me, it's victory including too over John's depression. I really believe that Jesus, he killed it. I mean, He annihilated my depression. And it wasn't instantaneous. From the time I made the resolution in the summer of 2005, it took about 2 years. And by the summer of 2007, all my symptoms of depression were gone, and for the last 3 years I've had 0 symptoms of depression, and I attribute that to Jesus.
Was it during that time that you discerned a calling? I mean,
yeah. Well, and that's where big
were you still at this
came.
time working in the business field?
Yes, I was working. Well, I was kind of actually I was job hopping a little bit. I worked in nonprofit. I worked for United Way for a time, and I worked in the corporation more in IT. And I also did some Spanish translation and some Spanish medical interpreting. So a number of different things. But as I continued to get better and improve and grow in my faith, I didn't even really worry about that. I just had this feeling God will provide. And okay, this job ended. This was a seasonal job. This was a contract job. Okay, but things continued to get better. And then a year after I had converted, in the spring of 2007, I started to feel the call, which was a shock. And I thought to myself, "Well, me, Lord, are you sure?" With my relatively recent history here of struggle, I mean, I was so happy to be getting better and enjoying my work. It was very unexpected because when it hit, I was doing something professionally very exciting. I was actually in a joint venture for a new company with a business partner, which really involves Spanish, and I was very into it and engaged, and it's actually the most exciting professional job I'd ever done.
So it almost seemed like you had landed at that point, and
exactly.
there you were.
So for those feelings to hit at that point was a total shock and surprise. They didn't go away.
Was it the voice of that nun down in Chile, you think?
I thought about that.
Hounding you?
Yeah, I thought, I wonder if they've been praying, yeah. It hit, and so I finally said, okay. I told my business partner. I went to the local diocesan vocations director, and I shared with him what was going on, and he gave me some great advice. He said, okay, I want you to start going to Mass every day. I want you to make a holy hour and come back, get involved with your parish more, and come back and see me in 2 months. We'll talk again. So, but actually, so my discernment really began in full force then. But I discerned pretty early on that I felt more called to the religious order track of priesthood versus the diocesan track. Because, those are the two routes that are basically open when you're considering the priesthood. You can belong to the diocese, and they station you within their zone as a priest, or you can belong to a worldwide religious community, and you serve their charism, their mission, and they could put you theoretically anywhere around the world. And I think with my experience as a Catholic, my formation as a Catholic, the international exposure and all that, I feel like it just sort of lent itself more to that second route than the first one. So, but then the question became, well, who do I discern with? There's so many religious communities out there, hundreds of them. Well, when I was at Notre Dame, there were a couple of very inspiring Holy Cross priests I had met, and for those who don't know, it was the Congregation of Holy Cross, a French religious order which founded Notre Dame. And still, the president is a Holy Cross priest. They still basically run the place. And so I decided to start with them. The Father Pat, the priest I was closest to at Notre Dame, he was the director of campus ministry when I was an undergrad. By the time I was discerning for the priesthood, he had become the rector of the seminary. So I got in touch with him. He put me in touch with his vocations director, and I ended up discerning with Holy Cross for just over a year, so a good stretch. And I was really nervous at first because I wanted to be very honest about my past. And Father Ed, the vocations director at Notre Dame, explained to me that under canon law, any young man who attempts suicide is automatically disqualified from consideration for the priesthood. But to have suicidal thoughts, that's right, yeah.
I didn't know that.
But to have suicidal thoughts per se, it's not a deal breaker, but it can be sort of a red flag, obviously, because obviously they want to make sure that the young men are of sound mind, right? So the Holy Cross told me to continue seeing a counselor and continue my spiritual life, which is growing, and stay in touch with them. Well, things continued to get better. I ended up actually getting a counselor who was the director of the counseling program at the University of St. Thomas, a Catholic university in St. Paul, and she had extensive experience counseling seminarians. So now by the time I started seeing her, my depression was basically gone. So the focus switched from treating John's depression to essentially preparing John for the challenges of seminary and the challenges seminarians face. So she was a godsend. So then came the point in fall of 2008 where I made a big seminary visit down to Notre Dame. And the first thing I had to do on my seminary visit was sort of deal with some of the emotions and baggage I felt I had from my my time there as an undergrad, because I hadn't been back to Notre Dame in 5 years since graduating. And so I remember praying to Our Lady and saying, there are some things that I'm angry about and still, I guess, have baggage with. I need you to take that away from me so I can discern with a clear mind and move forward with Holy Cross. And she did. She did. And I had this moment where I felt it lifting, and I felt so much better. And from that moment on, I made my peace with all my experiences at Notre Dame, and everything was fine. And I held no grudges or anything. It was just, everything was fine. But during that visit and talking with them, I had a great visit with them, the great guys at that order. I continued to feel her presence. And I felt it so strongly, especially when I was praying at the grotto there, that I started to wonder whether I should take a step back and explore religious communities that have a more distinctly Marian charism, that have her, kind of as a patroness more directly. So I told Holy Cross, I went home, I looked up Marian communities on the internet, and I found about 10 or 12 of them. So it was through Google that I found the Marians of the Immaculate Conception. I zeroed in right away on them. Their charism resonated with me. And also there was another community that I looked at, the Oblates of the Virgin Mary. And I spoke with vocations directors from both of those places. I set up visits. And my first visit with was with the Marians and Father Don Calloway, their vocations director. So they have their men for the first year, their postulants study at the Franciscan University of Steubenville in Ohio. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I went for a vocations retreat. And I had a very powerful experience there. And so I had a visit scheduled for Boston for the Oblates like 3 weeks later, but I decided to reroute that flight from Boston to Washington, D.C., because Washington, D.C. is where the Marians send their men to study at seminary. They actually send their men to study with the Dominicans at a seminary on the campus of Catholic University of America in downtown D.C.
Yeah, right.
So I flew down to D.C. instead, and when I was there, a fabulous visit, and it was so great because we were driving up to the campus, and I saw this massive church, and I recognized it. It was the Basilica of the Immaculate Conception, huge, huge church, and I didn't know that the seminary residence of the Marians was so close. It's like a 5-minute walk from there. And I thought, well, isn't this perfect, Because through this, my discernment, it came to a point where I would think about Mary a lot, and I thought about these junctures in my life where she's in the background. IHM, Immaculate Heart of Mary, the first church I ever stepped inside. Going to the University of Notre Dame. Going to this cathedral in downtown Mexico where I heard this pastor, and that church was named after her as well. When I walked into the Missionaries of Charity home in Santiago, the first thing to greet me there was Mary's statue. So there were all these points along the way where she was very present. And so that seminary visit sealed the deal. After that visit, I said, okay, thank you for being clear with me, Lord. I feel I know where you want me to apply. And so I applied, and I was accepted. And I started my postulancy last summer, and I'm about to complete it. So.
All right, to start the bishop. Talk a little bit, if you would, a couple minutes left, for those in the audience that may not understand a Marian devotion, a Marian-focused charism.
Yeah.
Explain that, because for some that might mean that you're shifting your focus away from Jesus.
Right. Well, I think it's important to remember that in the Catholic Church, Mary is understood very powerfully as the new Eve, and there was the original fall with Adam and Eve, and then with Jesus and Mary, it was what you could call the Great Reversal, and Mary played an integral role in that, where she sort of ascended the steps that Eve had gone down. And so we put forth teachings, the Catholic Church puts forth teachings as mediatrix of all graces, and so as Catholics, my experience with her was really, as the Church teaches, in that she really does help draw you into the heart of Christ. And that really is her only interest. And she is a great and powerful means to do that. And there never came a moment in my formation as a Catholic or in my discernment where I felt that she was somehow distracting focus of Christ. I always felt as though she was drawing me closer to the Eucharist, drawing me closer to the life of Jesus through the Rosary, which is really the fruit I got out of that. And she has been such a tremendous help, and so I guess that's what I would say to people who kind of wonder about that.
All right. I think we had an email. Let's see if we can get it up here again, or we can. I can just summarize it in my mind because I remember it. But they were asking how your family responded, not just to your conversion to the Catholic Church, but he was wondering about your discernment to religious life.
Yeah, well, initially when I was first researching Christianity, and I would come home from summers from school and go to all these churches, and I think that they were kind of like, "Whoa, what's going on here?" and a little uncomfortable. But progressively, as I then settled on the Catholic Church and everything, they saw that there's no cult thing going on. There's no danger here, But then, as I recovered from my depression, I think they really saw that, wow, this is really playing a huge factor in John getting better. And I'm at the point now in my discernment and vocation where they're very supportive. And my dad tells me how proud he is of me and all that, and so that's all wonderful. So they're supportive, and I think they're curious as to what the future might hold for me. So
I'm wondering, let's say that someone's watching who not just came from the same background as you, but maybe is struggling with depression. Yeah. Talk to them about how making the same journey home would be a great way to grow closer to Christ in His church.
Well, the first thing I would say is that you're never alone. Even when you truly feel alone, you're not. And that I think God is great at sending little signals to us. And that it can be something as small as, look, God, I don't know who you are really. I don't know if you're everything that this church or that church says you are, but I'm in straits now and I could use some help. I mean, even if there's that inch of turning towards God, I really think He rushes in. And I would like to tell people that, and again, just based on what I went through, I really believe that if you ask Jesus for help and for relief or consolation, if you're in that state of mind, He really does send it. He may send it directly. He may send it through another person. But if you just turn to Him just the littlest bit, it can help so much. And I also felt, in talking my depression, I would like to encourage Catholics and Christians and people to pray for people who are depressed, because I think a lot of people don't know how widespread it is. So many Americans are depressed. I think it's like 15% of Americans in any given year can be depressed. And worldwide, it's actually quite shocking. Across the world, every year, more than 1 million people commit suicide. And it's actually across the world, it's the leading cause of death among teenagers, and it's the leading cause of death among adults under the age of 35. So there's a great prayer need, I think, because there's a lot of despair, I think, out there in the world for a number of reasons. And I think people need to think about God again as a source of consolation.
You could really make a direct connect almost between the result of the Enlightenment and the relativism and the scientific materialism, all of which seem to believe that they've come victorious, and yet they've left people without hope.
Yeah, and also the kind of what you said earlier, the cult of the self. I mean, I think that in American society we really suffer from that, and it's okay to ask for help from above. And maybe that's something some of us have lost sight of, because there are times where you really do, you get to be in straits, and so I have no regrets over the experiences I went through. I think all this has made me a better person, and in a way it introduced me to God. So it was definitely bringing good out of bad. The things that did happen. So.
And when I hear your story, it seemed the other three things really came out that the Lord used. One was your reaching out to the poor, but also the rosary.
Yes, absolutely.
And visiting Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament.
Yes, it was so important, especially the rosary and visiting Him in the Blessed Sacrament. And one of the reasons was I also kind of suffered from some anxiety, and it would calm me down so much just spending some moments with Him, and it gives you a peace, and you're able to put things in perspective and deal calmly with things. So it was very important.
What's the website for your order in case someone wanted to visit?
Yeah, the website for the Marians is www.marian.org.
All right. So, John, thank you so much.
Thank you, Marcus.
And God bless you as you continue your journey.
Thank you.
Your discernment. All right. Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Journey Home. I hope it's been an encouragement to you. Let's pray for John, and we'll also pray for you on your journey. God bless you. See you next week.